In Hollywood, silence was survival, and Angie Dickinson stayed silent for 70 years. Her story begins far from the lights of Los Angeles, in North Dakota, where a restless girl filled a notebook with poems and questions about a world that expected her to stay small. But protection became isolation, and isolation became silence. One night, at 2 in the morning, Angie received the news that would define her downfall. She had been cast in the role of her career, a film critics whispered would reshape her legacy. Hours later, Frank made a single call to the producer. His voice was calm, polite, final. "Keep her in that film, and your career ends here." By sunrise, the role was gone. No confrontation, no explanation. Just silence. The kind that does not echo as it erases. No training, no family connections, only ambition and a gaze that stopped people mid-sentence. Angie stayed for years, not out of love, but out of hope. Hope that the man she met in the beginning, the one who sent roses and laughter, might return. He never did. What remained was a ghost, a shadow of control that followed her long after the relationship ended. The world continued to adore Frank Sinatra. His music played at galas, weddings, funerals. Angie's name faded from headlines. Hollywood did not blacklist her with ink. It did it with silence, one unreturned call at a time. Years later, when asked about him, she simply said, "He never hit me. He never yelled." She arrived in Hollywood when the studio gates still decided who mattered, and talent alone was never the currency that counted. But he took everything, just the same. The root cause was never a single man. It was the system that empowered them, the culture that taught women to protect the very forces that broke them. Angie Dickinson learned early that genius excused cruelty, that love could disguise control, and that silence, once chosen, becomes its own prison. By the early 1970s, Angie Dickinson had learned that survival in Hollywood was not about talent. It was about endurance. Each year, her roles grew smaller, the scripts thinner, and the applause quieter. But what came next was not failure. It was erasure. His name was Jack Webb. By the time the cameras adored her, the game had already turned. To the public, he was a visionary, a director who brought realism to American television. To Angie, he became the embodiment of how quiet power could destroy without a single word. Their story began as a professional opportunity. Jack was developing a new crime series, something modern, sharp, and bold. Angie, fresh from a successful film, was invited to audition for a recurring role. The meeting was formal, framed by walls lined with awards and photographs of famous faces who owed him their success. Jack spoke with confidence, the rhythm of a man who expected to be obeyed. He told her she had something rare, something undeniably cinematic. His words were measured, his smile precise. Angie left believing the role was hers. Behind every invitation, every dinner, every role, there was a man who held the key to her future, and the price was silence. That night, her agent called to say everything looked perfect. The part would be confirmed in the morning. But morning brought silence. Hours passed. Then a single message arrived. Not from Jack, but from one of his producers. The role was no longer available. No reason, no apology. Just finality. At first, Angie assumed there had been a scheduling issue. She learned early that in this world, men did not simply love or mentor. They possessed. Perhaps the studio had changed direction. But then, one by one, her other opportunities began to disappear. 3 projects in preparation vanished within 24 hours. Meetings she had confirmed were suddenly postponed indefinitely. Her calls went unanswered. Her agent could not explain. The silence was too coordinated to be coincidence. Days later, a friend in production whispered the truth. Jack had made an advance. It had not been vulgar, not even explicit, just a suggestion, a quiet test of obedience. Angie had declined, thinking professionalism would protect her. They built her, branded her, and when she refused to yield, they dismantled her quietly. But in Hollywood, a woman's refusal was never just personal. It was political. Jack did not confront her. He did not shout. He simply erased her. For the next year, Angie watched her career dissolve in real time. Casting lists no longer included her name. Studio executives who once called her "darling" now avoided eye contact at industry parties. Reporters stopped requesting interviews. It was as if she had vanished between one magazine issue and the next. For years, the magazines called her lucky. The press speculated she had chosen to take a break, perhaps to rest, perhaps to focus on family. No one questioned the narrative. In Hollywood, disappearance was always explained as choice. Jack Webb, meanwhile, thrived. His shows dominated the ratings, his influence expanded. When he appeared at award ceremonies, the applause was thunderous. He was hailed as a pioneer who brought integrity to television. No one asked what integrity meant when it was built on silence. Angie remained invisible. Her silence became her reputation. Difficult, unreliable, withdrawn. They printed stories of romance, devotion, and effortless glamour. The language of exile was polite, but its consequences were brutal. In private, she began to understand that what had happened to her was not unique. It was a pattern. She heard whispers at industry gatherings, stories traded between women who spoke in cautious metaphors. One actress said, "He stopped calling after I said no." Another admitted she was told to be more cooperative if she wanted to work again. Their experiences differed in detail, but shared the same ending: erasure. Hollywood had perfected its punishment. No scandals, no headlines, no confrontations, just silence. For every man accused, there were a dozen women who vanished without explanation. No one asked why her name began to disappear from casting lists or why interviews suddenly stopped. And for each woman who vanished, there was a story the world never learned. Angie carried that knowledge like a secret file. She did not speak out, not because she was afraid, but because she knew no one would listen. In an era when men controlled the studios, the press, and the money, truth was a currency only they could afford to spend. She adapted. She accepted smaller roles, the ones no one else wanted. She appeared in television dramas that required no glamour, only endurance. She played mothers, victims, women whose pain existed only to move the story forward. It was not the career she once imagined, but it was survival. Years passed. Now, at 93, she has decided that survival is no longer enough. They saw the smile. They did not see the exile. Jack Webb's legacy grew. When he died in 1982, the obituaries praised his vision and discipline. They called him a perfectionist. They did not mention the women who paid for that perfection. Angie read the news in silence. She did not cry. She did not curse. She simply remembered. Because memory was the only justice left to her. In time, that memory turned from grief into understanding. In the official record, Angie Dickinson took a step back. She realized that what had destroyed her was not one man's decision, but the system that allowed chits, an industry designed to protect power at any cost. And yet, she did not disappear completely. The public forgot, but she endured, carrying herself with the same composure she had mastered decades earlier. She smiled in interviews, spoke kindly about the industry that had betrayed her, and refused to let bitterness define her. But behind every quiet smile was the exhaustion of someone who had survived an invisible war. At night, alone in her apartment, she sometimes replayed the silence, the phone calls that never came, the scripts that stopped arriving. Each absence was its own sentence, a reminder of how easily the world could decide someone no longer existed. Still, she did not break. Her endurance became its own form of rebellion. Because in a world where men destroyed careers with a whisper, simply staying alive was defiance. In reality, the system pushed her out. Angie Dickinson never accused Jack Webb publicly. She did not need to. Her silence, once weaponized against her, had become testimony of its own. Now, at 93, she speaks not to destroy reputations, but to document the truth. The punishment was never loud. It was not scandal or outrage. It was the quietest thing of owling, forgetting. And Angie Dickinson refused to be forgotten. After the silence of Hollywood, Angie Dickinson sought refuge in something that resembled calm. What she found was a different kind of cage. Now, nearly 7 decades later, she no longer protects their reputations. It came not from the studios or the producers, but from a man who called it love. His name was Larry King. To the world, he was the curious mind of late-night television, the man who asked questions for a living. To Angie, he was a man who seemed to have none, at least not at first. He listened, which was rare. After years of being watched and judged, listening felt like safety. Their relationship began softly. He admired her resilience, her grace, her history. He said she was misunderstood. He promised that, with him, she could finally rest. She speaks not from bitterness, but from clarity, the kind that only arrives after a lifetime of silence. And for a time she believed him. At first, his care looked like devotion. He wanted to know how she slept, what she ate, whom she trusted. Then the questions multiplied. Where are you going? Who will be there? When will you return? He began to review her scripts, advise her on which interviews to avoid, which people to ignore. It was never framed as control. It was love, concern, protection. Her voice is steady, her memory exact, and her purpose unflinching. But protection has a cost when it becomes possession. Weeks turned into months, and Angie realized that her world had grown smaller. Friends stopped calling. Invitations stopped arriving. When she tried to reconnect, Larry would smile and say, "You do not need them anymore." His words were gentle, but their effect was absolute. He never shouted. He never struck. His weapon was guilt. When she questioned his behavior, he wept, saying she was his only reason to live. This is not a confession. She began to measure her words, to monitor her tone, to shrink herself to avoid his despair. Then came the moment that stripped away every illusion. One morning, she discovered a small microphone hidden beneath the seat of her car. When she confronted him, he did not deny it. He said it was intimacy, a way of understanding her better. The logic was twisted, but the delivery calm. That calm frightened her more than any anger could. For weeks, she lived in quiet panic, pretending everything was fine while planning her escape. The breaking point arrived after a missed call. She had been in a meeting, one of the few career opportunities still available. It is a reckoning. When she returned home, she found every photograph of them destroyed, her journals shredded on the floor. Larry stood among the wreckage, bleeding from a self-inflicted cut, whispering, "If I cannot have your life the way I need it, I do not want it at all." That night, Angie did not scream or cry. She simply packed a small bag, took her daughter, and left before dawn. No note, no confrontation, only absence. In the weeks that followed, she disappeared into a small apartment in Los Angeles. She unplugged the phone, drew the curtains, and stopped answering the door. She needed silence again, not the imposed kind, but the kind she chose for herself. For the first time, her silence was freedom. A dissection of how 5 men as each celebrated, each untouchable, used affection, authority, and fame to shape a woman's destiny and then bury it. Years later, when asked why she never spoke publicly about the relationship, she answered quietly, "Sometimes you do not realize what happened to you until long after it is over. And by then, you are too tired to explain." Her calmness in that sentence was not resignation. It was wisdom earned through pain. But the final betrayal would not come from a lover. It came from a friend. Johnny Carson was not just the face of American television. He was its voice. He shaped reputations with humor, ended them with a pause. When he invited Angie to appear on The Tonight Show to celebrate her career, she saw it as vindication, a recognition that she still mattered. The studio lights were blinding, But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms are really driving this crisis? The applause was thunderous. For the first time in years, she felt seen. But beneath the warmth of the spotlight, another narrative was unfolding. Earlier that day, Johnny had been shown an unreleased clip, an old interview in which Angie had mentioned a disgraced producer she once worked with. The footage was never aired, but in the wrong hands, it could have reignited scandal. Johnny buried it, not to protect her but to control the moment. As they embraced for the camera, he leaned in and whispered, "I just saved you from being humiliated. Do not make me regret it." The audience laughed, unaware of the warning disguised as charm. To them, it was a playful exchange between friends. For decades, she smiled through betrayal, played by the rules of men who owned the system and endured the kind of wounds that never reached the tabloids. We will analyze every detail, from the first manipulation to the irreversible damage, to see how the entertainment world truly works, and how an icon long forgotten redefines what power means. To Angie, it was the final lesson. Even her silence could be staged. After that night, her phone went quiet again. No new scripts. No invitations. Her name, once synonymous with Hollywood grace, faded into the background noise of nostalgia. No headlines marked her downfall. No one asked why she disappeared. That was the genius of Hollywood exile. It arrived without sound. But age has its own kind of clarity. Now, at 93, Angie speaks not to accuse, but to reclaim. Tonight, Angie Dickinson breaks her silence. Each name she utters is not an attack, but a recorder, a restoration of memory stolen by others. Her reckoning is not about vengeance. It is about truth. Because every woman who disappears leaves behind a question: who decided she should be forgotten? The climax of her story is not an explosion of anger, but the quiet act of remembering out loud. She sits by the window, the afternoon light washing her face, and she says the names one by one. Each syllable carries decades of silence. When she finishes, she does not look victorious. She looks free. For the first time in her life, the silence belongs to her. The question is not why she waited. Time has a way of revealing what fame conceals. At 93, Angie Dickinson is no longer the shimmering vision the world once adored. The red carpets are gone, the flashbulbs have faded, and her voice trembles when she speaks. But when she does, every word carries the weight of a century. The woman who once defined elegance now defines endurance. Her story is not about tragedy. It is about survival. She lived through an era when silence was demanded, and she turned that silence into a mirror reflecting the cost of obedience. For years, people asked why she never wrote a memoir, never exposed those who betrayed her. The answer is simple: the world was not ready to listen. It took 7 decades, a cultural reckoning, and the courage of countless others before her story could exist without being dismissed as bitterness. The question is why the world took so long to listen. Angie's life, when seen in full, is not a tale of downfall. It is an anatomy of an industry, one that rewarded power, punished defiance, and called its cruelty glamour. She was not destroyed by it. She was defined in opposition to it. Each loss became a layer of truth she would one day reclaim. Now, as she speaks the names that once controlled her fate, something remarkable happens. The story no longer belongs to them. It belongs to her and to every woman who has ever been silenced into compliance. Her reckoning is not an act of revenge. It is the restoration of agency. By naming those who took her voice, she returns it to herself. Before the world called her an icon, Angie Dickinson was simply a girl from North Dakota with a voice too soft to command attention and a spirit too strong to be ignored. In the softest moments of her interviews, when the light hits her face just right, there is no anger. There is only clarity. She says, "I am not telling these stories to hurt anyone. I am telling them because forgetting is how it keeps happening." Her words do not seek applause. They seek acknowledgement, the kind that transforms pain into understanding. Hollywood, for all its illusion, cannot escape the truth that built it. Every lie eventually meets its opposite. Every silence eventually breaks. Angie Dickinson's story is proof that time does not erase injustice, it only delays its exposure. When she arrived in Los Angeles, Hollywood was not a dream, it was a labyrinth. In the end, she leaves behind no manifesto, no speech, no demand. Only a reminder that the cost of silence is always higher than the price of truth. The camera lingers on her face one last time. Her eyes, once the subject of endless adoration, now hold something stronger than beauty and peace. And as the screen fades to black, her voice remains. If my story reaches someone who feels that same quiet fear, maybe they will find the courage to speak sooner than I did. The reckoning is not just hers. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told to stay quiet. If her voice moves you, share it. Because behind every shining star, there are stories the world was never meant to remember. And Angie Dickinson has decided that forgetting is no longer an option. Every door that opened came with a condition. Every compliment carried a cost. Then came Burt Bacharach. To the world, he was the golden composer, the man whose melodies defined romance for an entire generation. To Angie, he was the promise of stability, the kind of brilliance that could protect her from the chaos of fame. But tonight, the curtain lifts. When they met, the connection felt cinematic, two stars orbiting each other, luminous and inevitable. The tabloids called it destiny. Angie believed it might be. In the beginning, there were moments that belonged to the movies. Candlelight dinners, premieres, whispered plans about family and art. She believed she had found both a partner and an equal. But love in Hollywood is rarely an equal exchange. Burt's world revolved around music, precision, and control. Angie's revolved around empathy, spontaneity, and presence. Their marriage began to fracture under the quiet collision of those differences. 5 namesake: Burt Bacharach, Frank Sinatra, Jack Webb, Larry King, and Johnny Carsonac will finally be spoken, not as headlines, but as history. Late-night sessions replaced late-night conversations. His genius, as the press called it, became her solitude. She told herself that was the price of brilliance. As actions that to love a man like Burt meant accepting the absence that came with him. Then Nikki was born. The moment Angie held her daughter, the entire architecture of her life shifted. Nikki was fragile, born with a developmental disorder that demanded constant care and limitless patience. Angie turned down film after film, slipping from the public eye to become her daughter's anchor. She read medical journals, memorized treatment plans, and learned the language of hospitals by heart. Burt withdrew further, not out of malice but out of denial. Genius, it seemed, had no space for imperfection. Angie Dickinson was once the most dangerous woman in Hollywood, not because of what she did, but because of what she refused to become. When Nikki's condition worsened, Angie called him in tears from a hospital corridor. His reply was clinical. "Will this delay my flight to Europe?" It was not cruelty. It was detachment, the reflex of a man who could orchestrate symphonies but could not bear dissonance in his own home. That night, something in her broke. Not anger, not rage, just the final fracture of belief. She realized that love built on admiration could not survive neglect. Yet she remained silent. She defended him in interviews, shielded him from scandal, because that was what women did. They absorbed the failure, carried the shame, and called it loyalty. In the 1950s, danger was not welcome in women. When Nikki later passed away decades after the divorce, Burt did not attend the funeral. No flowers, no message, not even a word. Angie stood before the casket, surrounded by strangers, delivering a eulogy for a daughter and a life she had fought for alone. The press described it as a quiet ceremony. They did not know the quiet was grief itself. But silence has gravity. It pulls until it consumes everything. And in Hollywood, that silence became Angie's reputation, a woman too emotional, too private, too complicated. What they called instability was simply heartbreak given no outlet. Then came Frank Sinatra. It was punished, disguised behind lipstick, contracts, and polite applause. If Burt represented distance, Frank embodied dominance. He was charm sharpened into power. To the world, he was the man who made women swoon. To Angie, he was the man who taught her that love could be a cage gilded in affection. Their affair began with spectacle. Flowers delivered at sunrise. Champagne in hotel rooms that smelled of power and nostalgia. He called her my angel, and the world called them the golden couple. But even gold burns when held too long. Frank did not need to raise his voice to control her. She was the actress who could hypnotize a room without a word, the quiet flame producers wanted to control, and the woman the industry would eventually try to erase. His influence was absolute. He could make a career rise with a single phone call, or make it vanish just as easily. The first time he intervened, it seemed harmless. A minor film role he disapproved of, a contract that mysteriously dissolved. Then it became pattern. Each time Angie sought independence, something disappeared. A script, a meeting, an opportunity. His affection always came with the quiet threat of consequence. She convinced herself it was love his way of protecting her from the industry's cruelty.